Have you ever wondered why some people live their entire lives without ever touching their real version? Why do they say things they do not think, do things they do not want, and remain in relationships that have long since rotted, just to avoid a truth they do not dare to face? Nietzsche would tell you, not because they are bad, but because they are weak. Human beings do not fear lies. Human beings fear the price of honesty. Most of us grow up inside layers of masks. Masks to be loved, masks to be praised, masks to be accepted. We wear them for so long that we begin to confuse them with our essence. But Nietzsche looks straight at the most painful point. Living falsely is not a moral failure. It is the abandonment of the greatest power a human being possesses, the power to shape oneself. Today's video is not a healing therapy, not gentle advice, and certainly not comforting phrases meant to help you feel better. This is a guide that forces you to look directly at your life, as if into a mirror with no exit, where every compromise, every avoidance, every survival reflex is stripped bare. If you are brave enough to stay until the end, Nietzsche will lead you through each layer of the false self, exposing how it is formed, how it controls you, and how you can sever ties with it so that, for the first time, you live as your real self, not as a version programmed merely to survive. Number 1. Human beings begin living falsely the moment they learn to survive. Human beings do not begin life with honesty. They begin with survival. Nietzsche understood this before any modern psychologist. The false self does not come from society, morality, or dogma. It comes from an instinctive layer so deep it has not yet been named. From the moment a child realizes that a gaze can warm or grow cold because of a single action, the child learns something even earlier than conscious thought. If I am excluded from the circle of safety, I will die. The body remembers this before the mind does. And from there, the first question a human being carries is not, "Who am I?" but something lower, more primitive, more trembling. What must I become so that I am not abandoned? Nietzsche once wrote in On the Genealogy of Morality, "Every instinct that does not discharge itself turns inward. When an instinct cannot be lived outwardly, it turns back inward and mutates into something else. A softer, more obedient, safer version, a false self created solely to remain accepted and not be pushed out of the safe circle. Imagine placing a fledgling bird inside a sealed room. It has never known the sky. It cannot distinguish between real wings and a flight path painted on the ceiling. It believes its movements must conform to the space so as not to crash into the walls. Human beings are the same. When we are too young to understand values or morality, we learn to shrink ourselves to fit a room we did not choose. Later, we give that shrinking beautiful names: polite, gentle, well-behaved, but in essence, it is nothing more than a technique for avoiding danger. Think of a child sitting at a family dinner who suddenly speaks a heartfelt truth, that they dream of becoming a painter, not a doctor or engineer as their parents quietly expect. The room falls silent. No one scolds, no one raises their voice, only a slight pause in rhythm, a fleeting look of surprise quickly masked by an awkward smile. For adults, it is a small moment, but for the child's fragile body, it is an alarm signal. The child does not understand the future, stability, or the value systems adults use to judge choices. It only feels one thing clearly. Its dream has touched a dangerous zone that instinct says must be avoided. From that day on, the child begins to adjust itself, like editing a painting to please the viewer, toning down a bold color, erasing a free stroke. adding a gentleness that is easier to accept. Not because it wants to deceive or abandon its passion, but because its body has learned how to shrink in order to remain within the circle of safety. You see, the false self is not a sin. It is a strategy of a small creature carrying the fear of disappearance whenever it is separated from the safe circle. That is why Nietzsche never blamed human beings for living falsely. He issued only one blunt warning: do not mistake a survival strategy for your real self. If you do, you will live your entire life like a soldier forged before he could speak, obeying reflexes rather than living as himself. Looking at this pre-moral layer, we see clearly. Before reason, human beings have reflexes. Before choosing values, human beings choose safety. That is why your early years did not create a real self. They only created a filter. Every reaction you grow into is shaped by that filter. You learn to read others' expressions before reading yourself. You sense shifts in atmosphere before sensing shifts in your inner world. You fine-tune every small action to maintain harmony, avoid disruption, and preserve the survival bridge you believe you need. That is why the question, "Who am I?" does not arise naturally. It appears only when you are old enough to realize the mask has fused with your skin. Before that, life revolves around a single question: how do I avoid being excluded? And when that is the goal, deception is not wrong. Deception is merely the defensive structure of a nervous system programmed to avoid danger. You did not create it. You simply carry it as the imprint of human history. If you are listening and suddenly feel something strange inside, perhaps a sense of relief, as if you no longer blame yourself for being fake, that is a good sign. You are seeing the false self for what it truly is: a survival scar, not a moral failing. And the moment you understand this, you can take the first step Nietzsche considered essential on the path to stop living a lie and rediscover your real self. Separate instinct from identity, reflex from truth, and ask a question you finally have the right to ask. If survival were no longer the goal, how would I live? Write in the comments one moment when you adjusted yourself just to be accepted within family, love, or work. No poetic language, just the honesty you once feared. Because from the moment you can tell that story without trembling, the first false layer has begun to fall away. Share it so others can see themselves in your fracture. Because from here, the real journey begins. And every false layer you are about to peel away was born from one deeply human truth. You were once afraid of disappearing, but you are no longer living in that time. And Nietzsche wants you to remember this before moving on to the next part. Number 2, Nietzsche denies a true self because the self is not something given. And precisely when you recognize that those false layers were once survival armor, the next question inevitably arises. If the old self was merely a defense mechanism, then what creates the real self? Nietzsche answers with a cold truth. There is no real self as long as the living energy within you is being directed from outside. Because without will, there is no form. Without self-mastery, there is no real self. The real self appears only when inner life is strong enough to orient itself, expand itself, and affirm itself without leaning on the crutch of acceptance. Nietzsche called this force the will to power. But the will to power has nothing to do with political power or dominating others. It is the deep energy within a human being, the drive that pushes you to expand your form of life move beyond old limits, and become a clearer, heavier, more present version of yourself. Human beings do not mature through understanding, but through the capacity to turn understanding into action, intention into form, and raw life into a style of existence. The difference between those with and without will to power lies in internal agency. Those without it live reactively, reacting to praise, criticism, circumstances, and fleeting emotions. They are like leaves blown by the wind. Their direction never belongs to them. Those with will to power live from an inner momentum. They do not wait to feel good before working. They work to feel stronger. They do not wait for motivation. They create it through daily action. They do not wait for others to believe in them. They act long enough to become trustworthy to themselves. Self-mastery for them is not an abstract concept. It is the power source of the self. One of the most condensed images of the will to power appears in the biblical story from Genesis, where Jacob wrestles with an angel all night. He does not fight to ask for grace or salvation. He fights to preserve the right to decide who he is. In complete darkness, with no support beyond his own will, Jacob refuses to let go, knowing that surrender would mean returning to the form life had imposed on him. Asking for a new name is a demand to become the person he chooses, not the one circumstance dictates. When dawn breaks, he receives the name Israel, the one who has wrestled with God, a symbol of daring to confront ultimate authority, to affirm one's own self. Nietzsche would look at that moment and say, "The real self appears only when a person stands alone in the dark, relying on no one, expecting no miracle, yet refusing to abandon what they want." That is the will to power, the force of self-mastery that expands your form of life instead of shrinking it in fear. In Nietzsche's language, the will to power is not ambition. It is life instinct at its highest form, the ability to command oneself. The weak live by emotion. The strong live by discipline. Discipline is not rigidity. It is proof that you have authority over your life. Emotions come and go, but the actions you choose daily shape the form of yourself. People often confuse "I feel this way" with "this is who I am." Nietzsche rejects that illusion. The real self, he says, is something you create through the ability to command yourself, not something emotions grant you. Lucas, a man in his 30s, always said he wanted to write his first book, but spent years stuck at intention. He blamed work, inconsistent inspiration, a room that was too noisy or too small. The truth was simpler. He lacked the force to begin. One morning, after realizing a year had passed without a single page written, he set his alarm for 5 a.m. Lucas sat at his desk while the house slept. No coffee, no music, no waiting for inspiration, just writing for 45 minutes before work. He repeated this day after day. 3 months later, a manuscript of over 60,000 words lay on his desk as undeniable proof. He did not change because his feelings improved. He changed because his will finally took form. Nietzsche would say that was the moment Lucas's real self began to step out of the shadows, because for the first time, he pushed his life in a direction he chose, rather than being dragged by habit and fear. And here lies the core of this section. The real self does not come from awareness. It comes from self-mastery. A person may speak eloquently, understand deeply, and philosophize endlessly. But if they cannot command their time, habits, actions, and reactions, they have no real self. They possess knowledge without force. The will to power is that force. It is the primal energy that allows you to stop living as a reaction to circumstances and start living as the cause of your own life. From this point onward, the journey of stopping living a lie begins with building strength. The strength to choose, to remain steady, to say, "This is my direction." And when the will to power grows strong enough, you no longer ask, "What must I become to be accepted?" But instead ask, "What will I become when I am the one directing myself?" That is the gateway to the real self, not the fragile self born of fear, but the steel-edged self, forged by the will to expand itself. Number 3. Herd morality, how the false self is legitimized. But if the will to power generates the real self, why do most people still live their entire lives in a diminished version? Nietzsche answers with another sharp blade. Because society does not need you to become yourself. Society needs you predictable, manageable, and compliant with what has already been arranged. Herd morality does not create the false self, but it preserves it by clothing it in the garment of rightness. Society does not care about your real self, it cares about its own stability. A strong individual is always a threat. A self-directed individual is always difficult to control. And thus herd morality emerges as a subtle tool that makes people believe they are moral when they are merely obedient. Nietzsche divided morality into two streams: slave morality and master morality. Slave morality celebrates traits that make people easy to manage: obedient, gentle, safe, humble, agreeable. Master morality does the opposite. It creates values, sets direction, and does not ask permission to live. One asks humans to look upward for judgment. The other demands they look inward to create standards. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche stated plainly, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. When society wants smooth operation, morality becomes a soft collar that tightens around your neck while you still believe you are doing the right thing." Social science reinforces what Nietzsche intuitively grasped in the 19th century. Solomon Asch's famous experiments showed that people will give wrong answers to simple questions simply because the group around them gives the same wrong answer. When many agree, the brain interprets it as safe, while dissent is processed as danger. This effect is called social conformity, and it operates silently like background music of the mind. The longer you hear it, the more you believe it is your own sound. Herd morality exploits this mechanism. It does not need force or threats. It only needs to convince you that obedience is reasonable behavior. Nietzsche once said, "In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule." When many people believe a standard, it does not make it truer. It only makes deviation more costly. That is why society does not need to suppress strong individuals. It merely needs to create a sufficiently large, correct standard, and even the strong will erode themselves to fit it. The greatest danger is that herd morality does not only govern external behavior, it penetrates straight into thought. It causes you to evaluate yourself through the eyes of the crowd, even when you are alone. You shrink your dreams not because they are irrational, but because they do not match familiar measures. You censor your words not because they are wrong, but because they may make you unsafe in others' eyes. You distort inner truth to preserve outer comfort. And from that moment, in Nietzsche's terms, you are no longer living. You are merely repeating a program that has been installed. Ethan, an office worker who long dreamed of opening his own cafe, saved enough capital, studied the market, and found the perfect location. But just as he was about to sign the lease, he heard the familiar voices around him. Starting a business at this time is risky. Stability is at least safe. Ethan closed the folder and convinced himself he was not ready. But the truth had nothing to do with preparation. He did not retreat because he lacked knowledge or foundation. He retreated because herd morality had turned his legitimate aspiration into something irresponsible, immature, reckless. So he returned to his old desk and continued a life he did not hate, but had never truly chosen. Nietzsche would call this the tragedy of civilized humans. Fear is no longer created by real dangers, but by the noise of the herd in the mind, the force that causes people to withdraw from the very life they desire. Nietzsche did not oppose morality itself. He opposed morality disguised as truth while functioning as power. Herd morality legitimizes the false self by making obedience a moral standard, safety a virtue, and compliance a character trait. When a value system is socialized long enough, people no longer see it as a choice, they see it as nature. And at that point, they lose the real self without ever noticing. If you have reached this point and suddenly sense a quiet space within, a space where you have never asked, "Does this value truly belong to me?" That is a good sign. You are stepping out of the herd's fog. Nietzsche wants you to begin asking, why is this right? Right for whom? And in service of what? Because the moment you see the power behind morality, morality no longer controls you. When an individual dares to withdraw the herd's measuring stick and set values for himself, the first truth revealed is this: society is not your enemy, but it is also not the judge of yourself. The real self can only be born when you stop living by borrowed standards and begin living by standards you create. That is the shift that moves you from a false self, legitimized by comfortable moral norms, into a sharp, sovereign individual who borrows no value system to exist. We have now passed the midpoint of the journey. Pause for a moment. Feel whether something is changing within you, a deeper silence or a resistance beginning to dissolve. And if you wish to continue peeling away the false self, dismantling borrowed norms, and rebuilding yourself through will, subscribe to the channel. Not merely to support us, but to commit to yourself that from today onward, you will no longer live by the noise of the crowd. Number 4. Self-overcoming. The self lives only by destroying itself. And when the will has grown strong enough to pull you out of the inertia of the herd, the journey is still not finished. Between a self that is forming and a self that truly lives, there always exists a boundary that very few dare to cross. A boundary where human beings are no longer protected by ideals, motivation, or understanding. Nietzsche does not offer gentle advice for this moment. He issues a command. The self grows only when it dares to destroy itself. He calls this process self-overcoming, not improvement, not perfection, but surpassing oneself by stepping into a zone where the old self cannot survive. Self-overcoming is not for those who want comfort, because stability is the starting point of decay. Every self that stands still begins to die. Human beings, according to Nietzsche, are not born to maintain a state, they are born to overcome. The phrase, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," from Twilight of the Idols, is not encouragement, but a description of a survival law deeper than biology itself. Whatever does not break you is forging you. And the paradox few dare to face is this: to become yourself, you must kill the versions that once helped you survive. Imagine yourself standing before a massive boulder blocking your path. You can sit there your entire life telling yourself this road was never meant for you, or you can pick up a hammer and strike. Each blow knocks off a piece of the old self. Each crack opens a new form, but the hammer is heavy, and every swing hurts. Hurts the muscles, hurts the will, hurts the act of watching what you once relied on being destroyed. But if you do not strike, you will remain there. And remaining there, for Nietzsche, is the quietest form of death. Self-overcoming begins when a person realizes that suffering is not a system error, not a signal that you are going the wrong way. Suffering is the selective mechanism of growth. But those who fear pain mistake the cracking of the shell for destruction, and so they choose to remain inside the familiar casing. And in that very moment, they lose the self that was trying to be born. Let me tell you the clearest example of self-overcoming through Elena, a 37-year-old woman who lived 15 years of marriage by shrinking herself. She always apologized first, always avoided conflict, always adjusted herself to keep the peace, believing that was love. But in truth, that was the old self, a version created from childhood fear of abandonment, a version that survived by avoiding collision rather than living truthfully. One evening, when her husband once again said the familiar line, "You're too sensitive," Elena felt a sharp pain, as if an old layer of skin were being torn away. She did not collapse, nor did she explode in anger. She simply understood with absolute clarity that pain was not a sign of being on the wrong path, but a sign that the old self was resisting. And for the first time in 15 years, she said a simple sentence carrying the weight of a complete shedding. "From now on, I will not make myself smaller anymore." The weeks that followed were full of conflict, tears, and conversations both had avoided for years. But precisely in that pain, a new Elena began to take shape. A woman with boundaries, clear needs, and inner weight. Nietzsche would say, Elena did not find herself. She became herself by letting the old version, the one that lived by fear and submission, die. Self-overcoming is not about adding something new, it is about removing what has expired. It does not ask whether you want to be better, it asks, what in you must die so that the stronger part can live? This is Nietzsche's most ruthless logic, but also the only logic that allows the real self to appear. You cannot step into a new form if you still cling to the old structure. Like a snake that must shed its skin to continue growing, human beings must discard beliefs, habits, reflexes, and roles that were once useful but have now become cages. Nietzsche emphasizes that those who avoid pain choose comfort, and those who choose comfort lose the self. Not because comfort is wrong, but because comfort does not create form. It does not push a person beyond their old edge. It does not force you to confront your weakest point. It keeps you standing still. And standing still, for Nietzsche, is the lowest form of living, a kind of self-binding through ease. Self-overcoming is the point where the journey to find the real self becomes serious. This is no longer a story about thinking, awareness, or abstract will. It is a story of an inner biological process. Break, discard, surpass. The more a person clings to their old version, the farther they are from the real self. The more a person dares to let a part of themselves die, the more they open a path for something stronger, deeper, and more honest to be born. And here is Nietzsche's cold but fair invitation. Become who you are. No one can predict what you will become, but one thing is certain. The real self does not lie in the territory you are used to, but in the place where your old self cannot survive for even one more second. And from the moment you dare to step there, you no longer live falsely. You begin to live as yourself. Number 5. ÜBERMENSCH, the one who sets his own standards. When a person has stepped out of their old territory, the next question no longer revolves around what must be abandoned, but around another question with creative weight. On what standards will I build my life when all borrowed standards have fallen away? Here, Nietzsche opens the form of life he calls the ÜBERMENSCH, not one who rises above others, but one who no longer needs any pre-existing value system to define his existence. If self-overcoming is the process of emptying, then the ÜBERMENSCH is the art of filling. And Nietzsche states plainly, whoever cannot create values for themselves will live their entire life under the values of others. Nietzsche wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But he was not speaking of a why that is given. He was speaking of the ability to create a why and then turn it into an inner law of absolute validity, without religious approval, without waiting for society's nod. This is where many misunderstand. The ÜBERMENSCH is not a grandiose figure, not a conqueror of the external world. It is one strong enough to grant meaning to their own life, instead of searching for meaning already written. Imagine yourself standing in the middle of a vast forest, just as the last light of day fades. There are no paths, no signposts, no memories to help you guess direction. Most people would stop and wait for a sign, a light, a guiding hand. But the ÜBERMENSCH does not wait. They create direction, picking up stones and sharpening them into blades, gathering dry branches and lighting the first fire, carving symbols into tree trunks to mark the path they choose. The world does not change, but their position in the world does. They become a creator rather than a dependent. This image is not meant to illustrate courage. It describes what Nietzsche called value autonomy. A human being who builds an inner map to live by. At a deeper level, the ÜBERMENSCH is not merely one who chooses values, but one who founds values. They do not live by what one should do. They live by what I deem worthy of bearing the consequences for. And once chosen, they do not change direction simply because no one agrees. They keep their inner vow the way an artist remains faithful to their style, whether the audience loves or hates it, whether the era accepts or rejects it. In real life, a sharp embodiment of this spirit is David Bowie, the British music legend, famous not only for talent, but for an infinite capacity to self-create identity. From Ziggy Stardust to the Thin White Duke, Bowie constantly transformed image, sound, and style, not to follow the market, but to follow an aesthetic law he set for himself. There were periods when audiences could not keep up and turned away, but he did not stop. When asked why he reinvented himself beyond predictability, he said, "I don't know where I'm going from here, but I promise it won't be boring." A reply perfectly Nietzschean. I do not live to be recognized, I live to be self-defined. Bowie did not ask the world for permission to become someone. He simply authored himself. Nietzsche would say, that is a sovereign soul, one who does not live on approval or rejection, but on inner standards. The ÜBERMENSCH is not someone who does not fear loneliness. The ÜBERMENSCH is someone who understands that being cannot be validated by the majority. They are willing to live a life few understand, as long as it aligns with the inner centripetal force within them. They do not borrow recognition to breathe. They do not need tradition to maintain balance, and they do not need society to name their identity. They stand in silence like a blacksmith before the fire, knowing that the final shape of the steel is theirs to decide. What makes the Übermensch dangerous in Nietzsche's sense is not strength, but non-dependence. A human being who does not borrow standards cannot be manipulated by praise and blame, reward and punishment, love and hatred. They do not rebel against the crowd. They simply are not governed by it. They do not deny old moralities. They simply do not use them as compasses. They do not oppose tradition. They simply do not surrender the right to define their life to it. Nietzsche did not present the Übermensch as a dream to worship. He presented it as an existential challenge. Do you dare live by standards you set yourself, even if no one defends them? Do you dare bear the consequences of what you choose, instead of asking for forgiveness before or after acting? And most importantly, do you dare become the source of value for your own life? Because from the moment you dare to ask that question, you no longer live falsely. You begin to live as a sovereign individual, unborrowed, unpermitted, unavoidant. You step into life as Nietzsche hoped human beings would, as an author, not an actor. And that is precisely the point where the real self is finally allowed to exist. If you feel that fire stirring within you, comment just one word, reborn, to declare to yourself that the old version is dead, and that you are responsible for the new one that will rise from here. Number 6. AMOR FATI and absolute existential responsibility. When a human being becomes strong enough to set values for their own life, Nietzsche leads them into a deeper layer, one where all philosophy, all theory, all efforts at self-improvement must step aside, because in the end, the real self is not proven by what you claim to want, but by the attitude you carry toward your own life. No one can shape their being while still harboring the illusion that someone else bears responsibility for them. From here, Nietzsche presents a principle both purifying and ruthless. Amor fati, loving one's fate as it is, without demanding it be gentler, without negotiating for comfort. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati." He did not call it a formula for happiness. He called it a formula for greatness, because only those who dare accept the weight of their life possess enough material to become themselves. Amor fati is not a resignation, and certainly not consolation. It is the opposite of complaining. It is the opposite of blame. It is the attitude of a person who looks directly at everything that has happened in their life, losses, mistakes, poor choices, detours, and does not wish to exchange it for any gentler version. Not because everything was good, but because everything contributed to creating the person standing here. A false self tries to erase the past. A real self uses it as material. Amor fati is the cessation of escape, not from the world, but from one's own history. Imagine a man whose marriage collapsed, whose career broke midway, who spent years haunted by the question, if I had chosen differently back then, would I be suffering less today? He crushes himself with parallel scripts, what could have been. He searches for every reason to absolve himself, youthful naivety, family pressure, difficult circumstances. He does not realize that every act of self-justification reinforces a weaker version of himself, a version that needs a story to escape responsibility. One day, sitting alone in an empty apartment after divorce, a quiet truth surfaces. If he continues to see his life as a chain of mistakes to be undone, he will never have the chance to create anything new. In that moment, he does not cry, nor does he rage. He simply says, "I choose to take responsibility for my own life." And from that instant, the past ceases to be a verdict and becomes a foundation. Nietzsche would say, in that moment, the man signed his name to his fate, and that is stronger than any promise of change. But AMOR FATI is only the first half. The other half is the mental experiment Nietzsche wields like a blade. Eternal recurrence. If you had to live this life again and again for eternity, every action, every word, every choice, every sleepless night, every moment of weakness or courage, could you say yes? The question sounds philosophical, but it is in fact the deepest moral test. If the answer is no, Nietzsche does not tell you to blame fate. He tells you to look at the cowardice in your choices, because life does not punish through circumstances. Life punishes by forcing you to live forever with what you avoid. Eternal recurrence does not demand that you like everything in your life. It demands that you be honest enough to admit some things cannot be changed, and therefore only two options remain. Either turn them into reasons for complaint, or absorb them into your being through active acceptance. The false self wants to redo life. The real self wants to deepen life. No one can find the real self while still longing for another version of themselves, a version that never existed. And here is what Nietzsche wants you to understand. Absolute existential responsibility is not "everything is my fault," but "everything from this moment on will be directed by me." It does not judge the past. It grants power to the present. Nietzsche does not want you perfect. He wants you to be responsible. And responsibility is not a burden. It is power. It is the refusal of all easy exits. It is looking at your life as a sculpture. Either you continue to carve it, or you let it stand there forever unfinished. The real self appears only when a person stops asking why things happened and begins asking what they will do with them. When you stop searching for culprits and start searching for direction, you step out of the territory of the old self, the territory that always needs explanations to avoid feeling weak. And when you stand before your life as living material waiting to be shaped, you no longer live falsely. You begin to live as someone who has signed their name to their fate, without begging, without running, without rewriting the story to lessen the guilt. That is the end point of every journey toward the real self, a quiet nod to one's life, not because it is easy, but because it is yours. And from that moment on, nothing can strip the creative right over your being from your hands again. A real life is not a reward for the virtuous, nor a gift for those waiting for the world's permission. It is territory that opens only to those strong enough not to hide behind old masks. And when you stand firmly in the principles Nietzsche has laid out, looking into your survival instincts, rejecting herd morality, destroying the false self, setting your own standards, and signing your name to your fate, you will notice something strange. Every relationship, every value, every choice once rooted in fear will fall away from your life like excess skin. Only what has weight remains. If you feel a sharp sensation somewhere as you hear these words, that is not a sign you are wrong. It is a sign you are standing before the boundary your old self cannot cross. You can turn back to continue living comfortably but falsely, or you can step forward to live as Nietzsche wished for human beings, without needing to be understood, without needing applause, only faithful to the being that is trying to be born. And if you want more people to escape lives they are merely performing, like and share this video. Sometimes a cold, sharp truth is the only force strong enough to awaken a soul that has slept too long.